To the video we were watching beforehand that was connecting things. Oh, you're my witnesses. Well, I got the camera. $150 million for falling on the chair. I'll settle out of court right now for $100,000. Anyway. Reminds me of the movie Friday. You know how much you get for a slip and fall in the store? Anyway, so we're going to go back to this video. We're going to look at the connections between poverty and divorce and family life. Maybe what the government could be doing or should be doing, and certainly in this instance what they are doing here. One of the things I think that at least some local and state governments are starting to understand is that all these elements are connected, and even though getting a divorce may actually make the GDP in general go up, it certainly doesn't help the general social atmosphere. Many times, obviously, when a divorce happens, both members of the marriage are put into poverty, or at least in a compromised situation. So again, and obviously, like I said, I'm not asking you this stuff specifically on the test, but I still want you to pay attention to these chapters, because we will certainly come to these things. Like one of the chapters is, we're going to look at stereotypes in the media. So at that point, we'll show some other stuff as well. And like I said, even though I didn't ask you on the test, I still think this is important for you to understand as far as not only this section, but sections going forward. So let's start back where we left off. It was about 5 minutes in on this video. If you remember, they were talking to people who'd gone through a government program. They were, helping to retrain people and also deal with marriage issues, not only after divorce, but before the divorce happens as well.
How much for her, and how much for her 2 children from a previous marriage.
The discussion kind of became about.
With the help of prep counselors Sean and Amber Crawley, the Williams worked out a compromise before the discussion escalated into a shouting match. That, says prep co-developer Scott Stanley, is the whole idea.
When it really comes down to it, couples that do well over time can talk without fighting about their difficult issues, and the couples that don't do well over time can't. Now, there's many other things that various studies would tell us are risk factors, and study after study shows that couples that handle the conflicts poorly are at whoppingly greater risk for not making it.
If President Bush has his way, the Oklahoma program could go nationwide. He has made marriage education part of his welfare reform proposal this year.
So my administration will give unprecedented support to strengthening marriages. Under the plan that I'm submitting, up to $300 million a year will be available to support innovation and to find programs which are most effective.
Remember, he's a conservative, and the conservatives believe that government's not the solution to problems.
Incredibly good for children. And stable families should be the central goal of American welfare policy.
Under the Bush plan, states could apply for federal funds to develop marriage education programs like Oklahoma's. Welfare recipients might get credit for attending classes as part of their required 30-hour work week. Oklahoma State Senator Kevin Easley is opposed to any kind of program, federal or state.
I see it as promoting motherhood and apple pie at taxpayer expense. I think what has happened here is this money, $10 million, has been set aside for a big government program that, in fact, could be used for necessity, more items that would be more of a necessity, like child care, heating assistance, low-income heating assistance, things like that would really matter.
Paying down the national debt.
As opposed to marriage counseling consultants.
The vast majority of clergy in the state support the marriage initiative. Hundreds signed a pledge refusing to marry couples without premarital counseling. But Reverend Robin Myers was uncomfortable with it and refused to sign.
How bizarre that conservatives would be recommending that the government get into the love business.
He's pastor of the Mayflower Congregational Church in Oklahoma City.
I have doubts about its constitutionality, that is, separation of church and state. I have some problems about funding private counseling services and so forth with tax dollars. I also, at a deeper level, And as a result of working with couples, preparing them for marriage, and working with them as they considered whether they were going to stay married, is that we're dealing with a mysterious, kind of intangible thing called love, that the government should not be using money to try to manipulate.
Mary Myrick's Public Strategies Company was hired by the state to implement the marriage initiative. She says the government is already involved in the institution.
And when you go to get married, you usually go to the courthouse to get your marriage license. If you elect to get a divorce, the government's going to tell you under what terms you can get a divorce, under what terms you can get remarried, how much you'll pay to see your child. While you're married, the government tells you how much taxes you'll pay based on whether or not your marriage is current or not. So there are all kinds of ways that the government's already involved in marriage. So we looked at that and said we'd like to do something more constructive and more positive to help families form and be sustained.
Critics of marriage education for welfare clients are not just found in Oklahoma. On the national scene, some have accused the federal government of proposing a federal dating service, something the government's top welfare reform official
It's called eHarmony.
I have no interest in running a federal dating service. I have no interest in saying to somebody who's a single mom or single dad, you have to get married or you ought to get married. That is not the point. The point is to say to those couples who are either already married or thinking about getting married, that is, marriage is a choice that they have made for themselves already, to give them information about how to build a strong
How many times do you think he's been divorced?
What the initiative is all about.
Research shows that couples who go through PrEP are more likely to have happy marriages and stay married longer. But it has never been applied.
But what decides what couples go get help? Those are probably ones from solid households. Remember, we read the evidence.
Isn't sure how that's going to work.
I do want to be really clear. A lot of this is new ground, and that means it's not exactly a new thing for government to go into an area without fully understanding what it's doing.
Yeah, that's
so they're
every
going to have
time they do
challenges, some
something.
of which they don't know yet, some of which we knew to expect, and some of which we're learning as we go.
It may be years before anyone knows if the Oklahoma Marriage Initiative works.
Well, it's been about 7 years since this program
researchers
started.
at the state university are tracking public attitudes about marriage and...
Hey, what the hell is that?
applied on a massive basis to the welfare population. And critics of marriage education for welfare clients are not just found in Oklahoma. On the national scene, some have
An intangible thing called love, that the government should
Institution. And when you go to
right,
get
we're
married,
about
you
here.
usually
Sorry,
go
I
to
don't
the
know what
courthouse
happened.
to get your marriage license. If you elect to get a divorce, the government's going to tell you under what terms you can get a divorce, under what terms you can get remarried, how much you'll pay to see your child.
Some have accused the federal government of proposing a federal dating service, something the government's top welfare reform official denies.
I have no interest in running a federal dating service. I have no interest in saying to somebody who's a single mom or in a healthy marriage.
What the initiative is all about.
Research shows that couples who go through PrEP are more likely to have happy marriages and stay married
That was the
longer.
end of it.
But it has never been applied on a massive basis to the welfare population. And developer Stanley isn't sure how that's going to work.
I do want to be really clear. A lot of this is
Public attitudes about
I
marriage.
guess that was the end of the piece. That's pretty bad. They just cut it off like that. So sorry about that they didn't have any more on there. Anyway. So, just in general, your reactions. Should this be what the government is doing, or do they sort of almost have to do this because marriage and poverty are so intimately linked? And here's sort of the element of I don't think Marx used this term, but many people, neo-Marxists as well as non-Marxist conflict theory, talk about this element of creeping socialism, that the government gets involved in something and then very quickly it snowballs into something much larger than it thought it would be. Medicare, Medicaid is a good example, Social Security, unemployment insurance, farm subsidies, foreign aid to countries, military aid in particular, that these things get out of control, and by the time people start to realize either the programs aren't working or that they're getting out of control, it's too late to do anything about. It's like the national debt. The time to act on the national debt was 1983, not 2012. We had 30 years of knowledge that this thing was coming. And not only did nobody really do anything except for that brief time in the late 90s when we had a surplus, things have gotten worse. People spent more money. We're spending a bigger deficits now than we were in the 1980s. Yes?
We're like 46% of our dollar is borrowed from China.
Basically.
That's first off. And second off, we have enough oil in America. In Alaska, just by itself, we have more oil than Saudi Arabia.
I don't know about that. If anybody's
It's been studied.
Well, if anybody's got then then bring me the information, because I used to live in Alaska, and I can tell you right now that if it is up there, it's not being tapped.
No, that's the whole thing.
Okay.
We're spending a lot of money.
I mean, because I'm pretty intimately related to, or knowledgeable about the ANWR issue, which is what probably you're talking about, which is our National Wildlife Refuge, where there are claims that there's oil, and particularly under the Bering Sea ice shelf as well. There's certainly a lot of activity up there, but again, it's an element of how do you get it out. There's a reason why Middle Eastern oil rules. First of all, the oil, and I'm not going to get into a whole big thing about this, but the oil in Alaska is nasty and goopy like slime. You could pick it, it's like goo. You slam it up against the wall and it stick. The stuff that comes out of Saudi Arabia is sweet, light crude. It comes out almost like gasoline, and therefore it doesn't need a refinery capacity. So even if that was the truth, it might even make gasoline go up because they have to engage in a larger amount of refining. And on some levels, I think the U.S. government finds that it's easier to prop up a despicable, brutal, repressive regime that has virtually no elements of any kind of democracy involved in it, to not only secure cheap oil, but also to keep a safe haven in the United States, in the Middle East, for the United States to have an ally. Which you know, if you look at the United States with our relationship, what complicates our relationship with the Middle East is one word: Israel. If Israel somehow, if they ever made peace with the Arab world completely, or the Arab world somehow changed their position, and the Israelis do a lot to upset the Arabs as well. It's not a one-way street where it's just terrorism and the Israelis are responding, which is what the U.S. government would like you to think, and certainly around the tri-state area where there are a lot of Israeli supporters and things like that. In general, it's hard for Arab people, especially Saudi Arabians, to wrap their mind around, and Iranians, who are Persian people, not Arabs, of why the United States is saying we're your friends on one hand, but we're supporting this regime that doesn't like you at the same time, and sort of getting involved in all of this bizarre politics. But it's obvious it's oil, and if Saudi Arabia didn't have oil, nobody would listen to the thing they said. So they were one of the poorest countries in the world at one point.
I understand that. But if America had a company that figured out a way to cleanly, like...
Well, I think what you really need to be, what really is, there's two. Look, if you want to solve America's oil or energy problems, at least for a medium-term basis for the next 50 years, and even reduce carbon emissions, two things need to happen. One, every single power plant in the United States needs to transfer over to natural gas, period. Or nuclear. And I don't think, with what happened in Japan and the level of seismic activity on this continent and terrorism and all this other stuff, that it's a good idea to be making nuclear power plants everywhere where we can't dispose of the waste. We have 240 years of natural gas in this country at our current consumption levels, to the point where it's $2 or $2 to $3 a cubic foot or whatever the hell they measure it, which is like an all-time low. It's usually $7 or $8. And then also I would say the shales in Canada, where they're squeezing that oil out and stuff like that. Until that's done. And why it's not done? It ain't just the oil companies, it's the coal companies. We're all choking to death on coal soot. Excuse me. That is the #1 greenhouse producing product in this world. Coal? Besides cars. The only reason why cars are worse is because there's like 3 billion cars on this planet. There's not 3 billion coal-fired plants. But if you've ever been near a coal mining region, it stinks like sulfur dioxide, which is like a rotten egg smell. The air is disgusting. The reason why Lake Erie is so acidic and you can't eat any fish out of it is that acid rain comes from coal If you've ever been around a coal-burning power plant, these are the nastiest smelling things you ever will be around. They are just horrendous. And why do they exist? Because 8 or 9 states make their living off of coal burning, and they got some of the high-level senators in Congress, and they're not going to dare to let natural gas be a part of this. So maybe I think to pull it back to what we're talking about here, some things the government needs to get involved in, other things it doesn't. One of the things that is clear that once the government gets involved with an industry or some kind of regulation, it rarely ever rolls back. Okay, once they start regulating the film industry, it's over. You know, I mean, when they put in the production code about nudity and language, you know, now you see what's going on. Or if you see the farm subsidies. You know, the United States government is intimately involved in corn and soybean and a whole bunch of other, and the reason why milk is a certain price, and there's orange co-ops. Once they're involved in that, they're not going to change their mind. There have been instances where that has happened. There have been certain deregulations, for example, the mortgage market, but you saw what happened there. And many people will tell you, especially from the liberal side of the equation, if the government doesn't get involved, then the situation is going to get out of hand. Is that the case here with marriage and divorce? The government has to get involved here. Let me put it, if you guys remember, hopefully, the first part of the thing, who was almost forced to enroll in these programs? People who were receiving what? This was part of a larger reform plan. Welfare. So it was welfare reform plan. Is this the government overstepping its bounds of responsibility, or is this the government protecting your tax dollars? Because they know if these people on welfare and they don't adjust emotionally well, they may never get a job, they may never go and get some training, and they're going to be on welfare till they run out of benefits, and then they're going to be they're going to be homeless. And do we need any more homeless people in this country? Let me put it this way. Do homeless people turn out well? Do they always turn out like Pursuit of Happiness or like J.K. Rowling? Or she wasn't exactly homeless. Whoopi Goldberg was basically homeless. Does everybody that is homeless turn out like that? They all write a Harry Potter book and become billionaires? No. J.K. Rowling was actually on government assistance. She wasn't homeless. But when you're on welfare, you're essentially homeless because the government tells you what? Where to live. They're called Section 8 housing. Okay, now some of them's not bad, but a lot of it, this is what we call the projects, okay? And they're war zones, a lot of them. There are some places, like for example, in Cabrini Green in Chicago, first of all, there are bars on all the windows. People in their houses would sit on the floor. Anybody tell me why?
Gunshots to the
Yep.
windows.
To the windows. I don't think you can worry about, I don't know what's wrong with my throat today. I don't know if you can worry about doing fractions if you're an 8-year-old child when you're worried about gunshots coming through the window. So don't you think the government has a right to get involved with this to stop this from going further? What do you think? Come on, somebody else who hasn't talked. Now I'll start calling on people. What do you think? Think the government should get involved in marriage counseling? Just
No, there's the necessity.
what should they do though? What? Anybody else? What's the problem once the government starts getting involved with this?
Is it gonna like completely get out of control? They're gonna pretty much just go down the road and just. I mean, obviously they're not gonna do this now, but like eventually it could be like set marriages and stuff.
Potentially some. I don't know if I don't think it may never get to that, but even just a hint. Is this an issue where the government is overstepping its boundaries when it comes to things like religious freedom? What do you? How do you see it?
I don't know. I don't think like marriage should be like the government's business.
So you don't even think they should probably even have government licenses for marriage?
Yeah.
That this should be a religious thing. And I'll tell you right now, well, first of all, it would be an issue because there's about 12% of the American public who's atheist. So maybe it says choose your own religion, like those choose your own adventure books or something like that. But I would say don't you think, how much cheaper do you think divorces would be if you didn't have to go through the legal process? It would be nothing. I mean, believe it or not, there was this. I love older movies, so I was watching this movie from 1975 with Carol Kane in it. It was called Hester Street, and it was about the 1890s in New York, about Russian Jewish immigrants to the United States. And the one guy had been in the United States for a while, and he was becoming very American, and he fell in love with this other woman. But his wife comes over from Russia and meets up with him, and they eventually decide to have a divorce. All they did was went to the rabbi's apartment, and he wrote out the divorce dissolution in Hebrew, and they spoke a few words of Hebrew and agreed upon it, and that was it. Okay, there was no state control the way you know it of divorce and marriage. What's the problem if you don't have the state involved, though? With marriage and divorce and children especially. Right. How about some other stuff that happens with divorce? What is some other stuff besides, if there's no children, what is up in the air?
Like the house.
Right, and things like alimony, whatever you want, I guess it wouldn't be palimony, alimony, child support if there are children, or who gets the estate, or if there is anything like that. Okay, and again, in this movie I watched from that was portraying the 1890s, it was done in 1975. They basically they did have to hire a lawyer though to decide these types of things. Okay, what's the connection though between divorce and poverty? Go ahead.
The more people who are divorced, the higher the rate of poverty.
What about prior to the divorce? Does poverty help? Does it make it more likely that people are going to get divorced? It's somewhat seen. You would assume that. I think one thing you can say, maybe not poverty, but money issues usually becomes a serious issue. What's one of the obstacles though if you're poor to getting a divorce, especially if you're in a bad relationship, an abusive relationship or something? If you're poor, go ahead. Right, I mean, divorce is very expensive. Maybe some of you can speak to this exactly if any of your family is a divorce lawyer or just a lawyer in general. I would assume that the minimum amount that you could get a divorce for would be $3,000. You ever talk to a lawyer for 5 minutes? I mean, my gosh. I mean, these people, some of them charge $100 to $500 to $1,000 an hour. I mean, and even though divorce is a pretty standard procedure, I would doubt. And if I can remember this, I'll try to call a lawyer. They're usually not in the mood to listen to. They don't want to hear a sociologist on the phone asking them stuff, either about their business or wasting their time, because they get suspicious and think I'm a reporter or something. But I would assume, and again, if you guys know anything, anybody got their computer open? Maybe look up what's the average cost of divorce. I would assume it's at least $3,000, and I'm telling you right now, to get a good divorce lawyer where kids are involved, you're talking $10,000 to $20,000. All right, it costs as much as a wedding, probably. Okay, although, if Paris Hilton never gets married, which she probably won't, or if she does, she'll get divorced 72 days later, like Kim Kardashian's marriage. What do you think that cost? $500,000, $2-3 million? Did anybody see? Did she have a big lavish divorce or marriage? There you go. I mean. Hopefully they're afraid to cost, but I would assume, what do you think Kim's worth? $250 million, something ridiculous, maybe even $50 or $60 million. And that's not counting, I don't know if she made any money off the sex tape. I doubt it. But anyway, that's not, and what's Chris Humphries make? $8-9 million a year? Something like that. So I don't think $2 million is that big of a deal for them. I know that sounds sick, but that should tell you why those people were in that park protesting against Wall Street, because to most Americans, it's one of the sickest things in the world to hear that somebody spent $2 million on something that lasts what? How long does a wedding last? 20 minutes? Seriously, that's what I love. I'd rather go to a wedding than a funeral any day of the week. Not only because of the emotional timbre of the event, which obviously funerals are, but sometimes you want to pay respect to somebody who's lived a long life. That actually can be a very happy kind of funeral instead of somebody who gets killed when they're 32, like one of my friends did in the car. But at a wedding, especially if you're not in it and have to take 2 hours to dress up, and I hate tuxedos. Oh my gosh, I hate tuxedos. I hate suits, but tuxedos take the cake for the most ridiculous outfit ever. And some comedian joked once that the reason why men wear tuxedos during the wedding is so that they don't have to think about what to wear and screw it all up. And then also, you know, if the groom doesn't show up, the best men are dressed up just like they just take one step to the right, and she can marry the best man or something like that. And obviously, kind of a stupid joke, but in general, you know, it's absurd for most people to think that people would spend $2 million on something that lasts essentially 20 minutes. I mean, seriously, you ever timed a wedding? Next time you go to one, time it. Okay, it's more of the build-up and the nonsense, isn't it? Right, than anything. The reception's always the best part of the wedding. That's why New Orleans funerals are fun to go to, because I know that most people don't see the way I did, and one of the reasons why people don't see death the way I do is because very few people have experienced it the way I have, stuck in your face, and I've had guns stuck in my face and stuff. I was in the middle of an armed robbery at a pizza place in Virginia Beach, believe it or not. So I've seen death from both sides. And so I look at what they do at the New Orleans funerals like that. When I die, that's what I want to happen. There better be chicken wings and all kinds of stuff, and parties and streamers and dancers and music and all kinds of stuff. I mean, anyway, that's not necessarily here or there. But again, you know, even with death, the government gets involved. Like when my mother died, they took taxes out. They took taxes out of her life insurance policy, and I'm like, man, even when you die, you can't get away from the government. I mean, I'm surprised they didn't dig her body up to steal the jewelry off her hands or something like that. I mean, my God. Anyway, so maybe we'll never get to this element of deciding what fully the government's responsibility is, but did anybody think it was funny that what's the Republican position about the role of the government in people's lives in general? And this is certainly one of the reasons why George Bush was well, he wasn't really elected in 2000, but why some people supported him. Okay, what's the conservative position about the government and in your life? You guys remember this controversy about, what was the controversy about the contraception and abortion thing with the Obama administration? They upset a lot of Catholics and Protestants. What was this about? Right, and they were forcing, like, you know, Catholic hospitals or schools or you know, the Catholic Church itself, or maybe they're employed by a Catholic organization. Like this school. I'm employed technically by an organization. There are nuns that run this school. And same with St. Joseph's. And what the Obama administration was saying was, for example, if I was a full-time employee and got health benefits, that part of what I would be paying for every month would be the option, if I wanted to use birth control, or for other people to use birth control when not me specifically, but potentially somebody who was employed here didn't necessarily believe in that. So what was the main issue? And mostly Republicans were against it. What was the main issue?
The separation between church and government.
Right. So are we reaching a point where the state is becoming the ultimate power, where it's controlling every aspect, or almost like a total institution? Even though this is a democracy, does the government act like a dictatorship?
I just want to make one point.
Go ahead.
The Second Amendment in the Constitution,
Right.
is the right to bear arms.
Right.
And when you think about it, it's not like we're not in the middle of it right now, but when you think about it, we're just coming up to the climax again, where the government is totally going to become oppressive. I mean, even Obama is manipulating his own power, and like basically under behind the scenes, he's basically like.
Well, I think
it's not like bad yet.
All right.
It's a spiral addict.
Right, I understand your view, and that's certainly the attitude that people take, that in a traditional conservative position is that the government should stay out of people's lives. And you saw President Bush, who was a Republican, spending $300 million for this to provide marriage counseling to people, and I assure you that it wasn't religious neutral. Or if it was religious neutral, why is it? And you saw that one. Remember, he got all those bishops and priests and stuff and ministers to sign that thing that said they wouldn't marry anybody. A pledge. They wouldn't marry anybody until they were counseled. I would say one thing. I think that you may be giving elected officials too much power. The ones that really have power in the government, the ones who make the decisions, are the ones who don't go up for election. These are the bureaucrats who keep their job for 40 or 50 years. These are the people who are in the CIA, the FBI, and FEMA, in the Department of the Treasury, and the Department of Defense. You have people in the Department of Defense that have been there since 1972, when we were fighting the Vietnam War. I mean, and the mentality still stays with them. There's an absurdity to allowing some of the, and many of them have committed fraud and all kinds of violations of people's rights, and it's like firing a teacher. It's just almost impossible to do. Anyway, any last comments on any of this stuff? All right. Now, before we move on, and I want to talk about race in incarceration rates, and also look at the Rockefeller Drug Laws. So, to give a little background on these other chapters that we've been looking at here, like navigating public places, also race and class in the American justice system, which I think provides you with a pretty good overview. But I think to bring it to home a little bit and be more specific, we're going to talk about some issues that related specifically to New York and also to the national level. But before I get to that, does anybody have any questions or want me to go over anything on the test? Yes?
For the third question,
Okay.
I found more of the answers in chapter 4 than in chapter 3.
That's fine, as long as you use the book. I have no problem with
Okay.
that. That's perfectly fine.
And one more question. The second question and the third question, like how have families and what constitutes a family change over time? Like, I just didn't get it. Like, I didn't know how to answer that question.
All right, if you go and you look in that family chapter, open your book right now. Because I'm glad you asked this, because we didn't go over it as much. Some of these things obviously we didn't go over, but I think this is important. I probably should have went over this a little bit more. If you look on page 157, you'll see here the beginnings of this idea of what is a family. Like I think in America, or I would say in most countries, you assume that the family structure that exists in your country, your community, or your particular is the way it is, and that's just, and it's naturalistic, and there's no debate about it. But if you actually look at it, there are different types of things. You have this idea of the family versus a household, or the nuclear family versus the extended family. Or you have families that are patriarchal and some that are matriarchal. You have some that include people who are not blood related to each other. How about things like blended families with step brother and sister and stuff like that? And you see on this chart here comparing two big classifications: traditional society's views of family and more modern views of family. And what's interesting is one of the things that has come out in the recession, and I want to say I had this queued up. Let me see if I can. I think this might be interesting to see what's happening to families. But one of the issues here is this idea of the accordion family. If I can find it, I'll show you this piece. And that is the idea here that people are moving in with their back with their parents again. I think this is it. You see this piece. If we have time, I'll show you part of this. It's only 6 minutes long. But one of the ideas here is that the nature of families changes not only based on the cultural views of the family, like in the United States. If you actually trace it, the nuclear family has its roots in the concepts of privacy and independence. The reason why you would live in an extended family is for support, and I think for this sense of you know, that you're your brother's keeper, your cousin's keeper, and that this is the way that you not only succeed as a family unit, but this many times extended families were a part of a business or part of an economic reality, whereas nowadays, or at least starting in the late or the early 1900s and into this time, people could make a living on their own and didn't need to live in a big family environment. I think also people's cultural attitudes and personalities started to change when it came to privacy. I mean, think about it. If you live, any of you have lived in a big family, probably some of you have. Even if it's just your nuclear family, like anybody here have like more than 4 siblings? What's it like as far as privacy is concerned? When you were a kid, did you have any real privacy?
Depends.
Like, for example, was it hard to get time in the bathroom in the morning? Yeah. How about like keeping people away from your private stuff in your bedroom?
Nah, that wasn't a problem. Keeping people out your room was a problem.
Okay, but did you have your own room?
Yeah.
Did you have your room from the beginning?
No.
Where were you at in the scale? Older or younger?
I'm the fifth.
So you're the youngest.
No.
Oh, but wow, so you're a middle child, right?
Yeah.
Do you feel you get ignored? No. Now do you live on your own now, or do you still live with your family?
I still live with my family, but the majority of my older sisters and brothers, they moved out. Some are married now.
So is it weird to not have that many people around, or you enjoy the new privacy that you have?
Growing up with it, you hate it, but once they're gone, it's like
Something's missing.
yeah, like because I'm so used to having like jokes. We used to play pranks on each other, so.
Right, when it's happening, when someone puts like orange juice up your nose or something while you're sleeping, it's not funny then.
Now it's like the house is quiet now.
They ever do the shaving cream in the hand and they tickle your face and you go like that?
It's bad.
No.
So, like,
Hot water in the
yeah,
pot?
like, they'll turn off the hot water in the house.
Or when you're in the shower, they'll flush the toilet or something like that. That's always a good one. My landlady likes to do that stuff. I swear, and I probably shouldn't say this on camera, but I'm moving out soon anyway. But I swear, every single time I get, especially, maybe it's just what time it happens on Saturday, like Saturday morning. I won't take a shower till like 11. So anyway, but as far as your plans are concerned, do you feel that when you go out, and do you want to get your own home and live by yourself, or do you think that would be odd? But that's not a number one, that's not like, you're not itching to go. Like, man, I can't wait till I get my own place. I can do whatever I want, play the music as loud as I want, all this other stuff.
Yeah, I'm not really itching for it because I can do it at home anyway, so it's like, it's not a big concern. Like, alright, I'm going to do it right now.
Okay. So, and I think it's what's interesting, you're displaying not only this, some of the reasons why you would want to get out of an extended family household or a large single, nuclear family household, but also some of the pitfalls of the nuclear family. Many times also nuclear families will move away from their place of origin and move to California or something like that, whereas the rest of their families in Massachusetts, and then they're dividing their power structure and their social links even more. So there were reasons why, legitimate, rational reasons why to live in an extended family. For physical protection, for economic protection, for emotional support, for learning things. Studies have actually shown that people who grow up in households with a lot of siblings tend to have better social skills when they get out into the world. And young people, this is an issue. In this country, you have a lot of people who are only children. And some psychologists, I don't know how much I agree with this because I've never done the research myself, suggest that people who are born in single households have a harder time connecting with people. They have a tougher time working in team environments when they get out in the workforce. They tend to have many times issues with depression. Again, I don't know how much of this is. I'd like to see the studies. I don't know how much this is true. They also say that single children tend also, especially if they were babied and pampered by their parents, to tend towards the narcissistic side of the scale. And it's hard to be a narcissist when you have 9 people in the house constantly knocking you, joking about you, that you think something's all big. And if you would have went home when you were 14 and told your brothers and sisters that you were going to go on American Idol and they knew you couldn't sing, wouldn't they have stopped you from leaving the house? Or go, okay, why don't you try out so we can film it, right? You would have known probably, right? They would have been more, whereas a single child where their parents are going, oh, you're the greatest singer ever, honey. Right? So I don't know. Anybody from that was an only child want to defend themselves from this onslaught of psychological data?
Well, I hate working in groups. I'm a child. I hate it.
Did you feel your parents spoiled you? What kinds of, did they tell you stuff like you're the greatest, or are they more controlled? Did you have aunts and uncles who had more children? You go over their house and see this? Did it annoy you to go to cousin things and family stuff where all these people were running around?
It's funny though, because I have a lot of cousins and we all live in the same town, so I can consider them.
So that almost acts like a surrogate
Yeah.
siblings to some extent. So, would you think it would have been better had you had other siblings in the house?
I guess a little bit, like, some, you know, like, some things you wouldn't tell your parents, you could go tell, like, your sister or something.
So do you feel that there were moments in your teenage years where it really was harmful not to have a sibling because there were things you wanted to talk about and maybe you couldn't discuss it with friends?
I guess in a way, yeah.
Okay. All right. Anybody else want to add? All right. Starting to get where I'm going with this stuff. And you guys should look at. It goes on and talks about marriage. For example, one of the new things now is cohabitation. Does anybody know what that is?
Is it when like they're living together but they're not married?
Right, and technically after 7 years, the state considers you to be common law wives anyway. And if you think that's not a big deal, it is a big deal because you go into court and you can get alimony for common law wives. So, and you know what's funny? People will tell you that after about 7 years is when people get burnt out on jobs and marriages and stuff. I don't know why that it seems to be a threshold for the human mind, but I guess 7. I guess you know what happens after 7 years? It's more than 5. Which knocks the freshness out, and you're starting to head towards a decade. And I think for most people, especially younger, if you're in your 20s, a decade sounds like forever. That's half your life. You know, when you get to my age, a decade is like... It bothers you to have done something for a decade, but there's also, like, I've been teaching for a decade. I'm proud of that fact. I love that fact. Okay? But the word decade sounds way worse than 7 years. And when you start heading towards 10 years, I think a lot of young... What happens, I think, especially with people who get younger, is that if you don't immediately connect and really work at the marriage, what starts to happen is that as you get older and all these other issues that maybe you don't want to get older, or your job is not going the way you thought it would, or maybe you thought you'd have more friends, that stuff starts to weigh, and if you can't share that with your spouse, it starts to put cracks in the facade like a dam, and then once the crack starts, the momentum of what's going on starts to take over. If you look at most celebrity marriages, probably aren't more than 3 years, frankly. Ronald Reagan once called it leading lady-itis, and it works for leading men too, that like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie met where? On the set. And Brad was married. Angelina had already divorced, and I don't know why in the world she married. You heard it, Billy Bob. Why anyone would marry you. Okay? Maybe if they were blind.
They used to have like necklaces of each other's like.
Right. Of what?
Of like each other's blood.
Right. I remember hearing something goofy like. I guess they were like both weirdo creeps or something. They just connected on this pseudo vampire kind of stuff or something. Maybe they thought they were Mickey and Mallory from Natural Born Killers or something. I don't know what it was. But and again, are Brad and Angelina married? And here, not that I'm obsessed with celebrity families, but this is certainly one of these odd realities. Is you have a cohabitating family where it appears to me, Bradley, that Angelina is in full control of the household. Who do you think wears the pants in this family? Okay, every time I see Angelina, she's wearing pants, although she does wear dresses every once in a while. Okay, and I guarantee she holds the purse strings too. Okay, most of the time, for some reason, if you control the pants strings, you don't control the purse strings, which is really strange. Okay, that's more of a traditional family. But here you have also as well, they have their own biological children, right? They also have, Angelina does not have any kids though with Billy Bob, right? She didn't. No. So there's no stepchildren. But there are adopted children in the household too. So that's what we call maybe more of a blended family. You actually look at it on page 170, it starts to talk about one-parent families. And why is it important that now society recognizes that? Whereas in the past they didn't.
It's more common.
Right, but what is the... So what if probably should be out of camera. But anyway, what's the point of recognizing something that in the past wasn't recognized? What's the positive benefit in the minds of some people to society and these individuals? In the past, how were one-parent families looked upon and treated by the government, by society, and by their neighbors? Huh?
Failed marriage.
Right, like there's something wrong. This is not what we want to promote. How about also stuff like this? Can a family be two people of the same sex? You starting to see these elements of controversy? Some people recognize that two men in a romantic relationship, even if they have no children, that's a family. Other people, that's not only is that not a family, that's not a marriage, and that's immoral. And if you listen to some people in this country, it's a sin, and you're going to go to hell for the rest of existence for that. Well, Dick Cheney thinks he's going to heaven. I love that. So just being gay is enough to send you to hell, but Dick Cheney manipulating the government is not enough. Anyway, so again, you start to see these elements. Blended families are one of these elements of like, have you anybody ever seen the Brady Bunch? This was a groundbreaking TV show. I know it's hard for people to understand it, but it was this idea. You remember, it was one day when this lady met this fellow, right? And they both had, right? And then they became this big family, right? And then the maid is in the middle, because you got to have a maid if you have 6 kids, right? And the dad is an architect and stuff. Believe it or not, supposedly, Greg dated the woman who played his mother, and I'm pretty sure they had sex or something. And the guy who played Greg is a bit of a, he's always hanging around with Playboy people and stuff too, so I don't know what. And then the one who plays Peter, no, the one who plays Peter was married to one of these bachelorette, or was getting married to the bachelorette or something. And they had their own show on VH1 called A Very Brady Marriage or something like that. So, but again, I think things like this were, you know, gay, lesbian families, celebrity families that have these elements. I don't believe Demi Moore and Ashton Kutcher were ever technically married, were they? I don't believe so. You know, but again, you have these weird situations that, you know, some people don't consider to be families, other people don't, and it's a big controversy. It's an argument about what is a family. And it's a very important debate for a lot of people, and for other people maybe it's not as important. You know, when you go to church, you're going to get a different conception of what a family and what an appropriate family is versus what the government says, versus what people on the street say, versus what we would say at a college, or what, again. And here it also comes down to, remember, this goes back to our idea about culture. Remember we talked that culture exists on multi-levels, like it exists at this level, at the highest level from the government institutions. At the medium level, it exists within your larger environment. If it's a, you know, the town, like Chicago has a culture to it. And not only does Chicago, but the south side of Chicago has a culture to it. But also, not only individual families, like some people will celebrate Christmas differently than other people. Some people don't put up a tree. Some people open their presents on Christmas Eve. Some people don't have any connection to the religious aspects. Other people don't put up a tree because they put up a cross or a manger scene or something. And similar to that, individuals can have their own sort of interpretation of culture, and that can come down to families. So this is why you get a lot of conflict in the society about what a family is, because if I was a gay man, and you're going to sit here and try to tell me that what I'm doing is not only illegal or unacceptable, but is sinful, that's a problem. You're calling me a degenerate based on my life choices. Offering no proof. Look, I would bet, and I'm not homosexual. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I would bet you most homosexuals, first of all, would say that homosexuality is a choice, or is it genetic? What do you think that most homosexuals say? That it's a choice, that you would choose to be part of a group that gets tormented by everybody else, or many people in society, and gets attacked? And if you're a gay man, you're under constant threat of being hurt. That's what they would say. For some reason, men like lesbians. I think they get to watch or something like that. I'm not sure what the hell it is. It's kind of weird, but lesbians don't get beat up the way like the kid in Laramie got killed and tied to the side of the road. I mean, if you're gay in this society, you're under threat. Gay men, at least. Okay? So, and I'll tell you secondarily, what they would tell you is, if somebody would dare to say that what they're doing is a sin, they would say, why don't you go get a note from God that said, God said this is a sin, and then I'll believe it. Let me put it this way. As much as religious leaders want you to believe this, does anybody know the true mind? If there is a God, does anybody know the true mind and heart of God? Does anybody truly know what's right and wrong? Can they say definitively, but if you're not baptized, you're going to hell? Can somebody prove that to me? Scientifically? Can you prove that to me? Can you die and come back to life and tell me what happened? Like in the movie Flatliners, if you've ever seen this. They can't really. But it's faith, right? And there's part of the problem. This is why scientists don't get involved in trying to prove God. Okay. Or angels, or unicorns, or any kind of auto thing that people think is the Loch Ness Monster. Although some do. So there's a lot of controversy behind this. And let's just for the moment say that being gay is biological. First of all, if there is a God, then you need to take it up with God. Why there are homosexual people? There are actually animals that display this kind of stuff. And if you're gay and it's not by choice, then society tells you you're wrong, then you're attacking me personally. You're not just attacking my characteristics, you're attacking me personally. And in general, do Americans enjoy it when you attack them personally for something they can't change? Like the color of your hair, or your eyes, or your skin? How about that one? No, Americans would never judge people just based on physical characteristics, would they? You see how bad that is? That gay people see this as bad as racism? This is as bad as racism? That what you're saying to me, it's like telling somebody, you're worthless because your skin color is more. I mean, that's unacceptable, but we still do it, and it speaks to the fact that society hasn't changed enough. Is there any specific question you want me to answer? Okay, did it help?
Yeah.
Okay. And like I said, if you look over that, that's what I'm looking for there. Maybe you're, sometimes all of us do this. We overthink these questions. So.
I think that's what happened, because I was looking for it, and I'm like, why can't I get it?
But if you read that, and even on 172, it says trends in American families, you can see. So let me play this piece. I think this might illustrate it a little bit as well. I don't know if we'll play this whole piece, but I think this is important to talk about what has happened to marriage in the United States. And then we'll get to some of the stuff on...
Oh, my.
Yeah, it's supposed to be public television, but I guess nobody got the message.
Finally tonight, our second story on the shifting trends in American life. This one's about the changing demographics of marriage. Ray Suarez has our conversation.
For decades, the fact that a sizable majority of Americans were married shaped our politics, where we lived, where we worked, and what we thought when we heard the word family. Recently, the Pew Research Center took a look at all of us over 18 and found just 51% are married, down from more than 70% in 1960. Stephanie Kuntz has
I'll send you this link in case you want to use it.
Marriage for a long time. She teaches history and family studies at Evergreen State College in Washington and is director of research at the Council on Contemporary Families. Professor Kuntz, welcome. We moved in 50 years from almost 3/4 of married adults to barely half. What happened? What's pushing those numbers?
Well, one of the things that you have to bear in mind is that 1960 was probably the most atypical year in 150 years. The age of marriage was at an all-time low. Half of all
my mom got married at
before
16.
they got out of their teens, and the rate of marriage was at an all-time high.
My dad was drafted in Vietnam.
So what's happened since then, primarily what's driving this is the rise in the age of marriage. It's now up to 26 for women and 28 for men. And that's actually a good thing, because the longer a woman delays marriage, right up until her early 30s, the lower her chances of divorce. But it does totally change the social weight of married households in our economy, our society, our politics.
But not only has the age at first marriage risen, which of course that's just math, it makes a smaller number of adults married.
Partly also has to do with college education.
People who have ever been married.
People take longer to get real jobs.
Has marriage moved from being sort of culturally mandatory to more optional?
This is another big point.
It's definitely moved to being more optional. That does not mean, though, that
if you weren't married, there was something wrong with you.
In fact, even more valued.
Still that way.
And it doesn't mean that the majority of Americans will not marry. I think that probably we're getting into a situation where a slightly larger number of people will never marry than in the past, maybe 15%, as opposed to 10% norm and 5% in the atypical 1950s. And of course, we also have some people who will live alone after divorcing.
Also, a lot of people are more afraid of divorce than they are of marriage.
In their 40s, 50s, and 60s at older ages than ever before. So for me, the main thing that I think we're facing here is that you can no longer assume that married couple households are going to be the main places where people...
I do want to stop it one quick, because I think she's missing one element here of social change. What has the attitude about premarital sex and promiscuity, how has that changed from the 1950s to now? Because this is a big part of why marriage is not as important. And if you even in 1958, or when my mom got married in 1969 or 68, if you wanted to have sex with somebody, what did you have to do normally in order to avoid social stigma? Yeah. And if you dare to get pregnant out of wedlock, oh my gosh. They'd kick you out of school. Sometimes they try to kick you out of the neighborhood. I'm sure if they could have arrested you, they would have. So that has changed drastically, hasn't it? To where you will have devout Christian people, whether it's Catholic or Protestant, what's the church's position on promiscuity and premarital sex in general? Even though it's not really mentioned in the Bible. There's no commandment that says thou shalt not have premarital sex. What's the position of most churches?
Usually it's wrong.
Yeah, that it's wrong. Okay? And that, if you actually take it to the farther extent, what's Jesus' view about sex? Supposedly. Did he have sex? Do priests have sex? So there is a general attitude about sexuality that is somewhat negative. But I know devout Christians, whether Catholic or Protestant, who instead of getting married because they want to avoid the sin of divorce, will prefer to commit the sin of fornication by cohabitating with somebody for years. And on top of that, whether they're Protestant or Catholic, using birth control to prevent any kind of evidence that they're actually engaging in this behavior. Okay? That's why if you saw that polling data that there were more Protestants against what President Obama was doing slightly than Catholics on some level. So, but again, both groups have these, or at least most of them, not all Protestant groups, have these admonitions against birth control, against cohabitation, against fornication, against all this other stuff. Okay, but it still occurs. So that's certainly one area. Part of that, where did that come from? Anybody tell me? What happened in the late 60s and early 70s? It's got a name. It's the reason why there's porno films everywhere now. Strip joints and stuff. Why porno actors are actually celebrities. The sexual revolution, you ever heard of this one? I know that in the 60s a lot of things were going on, the civil rights, anti-war movement, the counterculture, the women's feminist movement, but the sexual revolution was something very different. And even though a lot of these other revolutions, like for example the feminist revolution, we still have not had a female president. But one thing that has certainly changed is that women, especially women, but men too, can go out to the bar, sleep with somebody, and not be called a whore or a slut, or at least not to their face. And still, the double standard still has not changed. Has any man ever been called, I'll call him this, like Tiger Woods, he's a whore. He's a male whore. And I don't care what he says. I wouldn't shake his hand unless he sprayed penicillin on it. Okay, because I don't know where it's been. I don't know what he's doing. Okay, I mean, if I was his caddy, I'd wear gloves or something. Okay, he's a disgusting person. Oh, so is Elliot Spitzer, a disgusting bastard. But men don't get that treatment, do they? When you sleep with a lot of women, what are you when you're a man, Will Chamberlain? Who are you?
Hall of Famer.
Yeah. Well, or you're a stud, right? Man, I knew. And there were people when Tiger Woods came out, they were like, go Tiger! Right? But when Madonna writes a book, those of you who don't know, Wilt Chamberlain, and I don't know how he had time for this, and they made fun of it on Saturday Night Live going, number 18,732, I remember you so well. He said he slept with 20,000 women, which my first inclination is, first of all, disgusting. Two, most of those women were probably married. Bum, right? I mean, in fact, what do you, and the fact that he bragged about it, how many men do you think Madonna slept with? You want to ballpark that one? Even if it's 500. But Madonna's a whore and Will Chamberlain is a stud to a lot of people. Okay, and it's kind of sad, but that's the way it is. But what certainly changed in the sexual revolution is that women could be much more liberal and marriage didn't matter as much. And that has been an enormous change. Not only that, but the sexualization of the media. Right? Showing Britney Spears when she was 15 in that Rolling Stone layout film. You know, if you've ever seen it. Have you ever seen these pictures or remember just Britney Spears in general, her behavior, even when she was 16 and 17. This hypersexualization not only of young people, but of people below the age of consent. That there's been something that a lot of people think that there's something wrong
Make the major life
with the way Americans view sex now.
Entering into becoming sexually active, buying a house,
entering long-term obligations, living with somebody that is a romantic partner, even having a child out of marriage. So we can no longer assume that married couple households are the only place where people incur obligations, make commitments, and need help in meeting their obligations.
Well, you've talked about these big life moments, but have they responded to the fact that marriage has changed in this way over the last 50 years? Our tax laws, the way we build houses, the way we award property in courts, all kinds of things are still built around marriage.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just look
And
at what family policy.
Economic
Just
institutions
assume
cater
it's only married
family
couples who are going to
restaurants,
have children.
family stores,
Or
all this
sing-
other stuff.
just
Family-friendly
ignore the fact that singles,
movies.
Also have responsibility for aging
Disney's made
parents.
$30 billion
There are some
last
ways in
year
which we are
catering to
still
families and children.
Acting as though American families were like 1950s sitcoms. Instead of the tremendous diversity. Most people will marry in America, but most people will spend substantial portions of their adult life outside marriage. It's a more fluid situation than it used to be. They'll move through, they may cohabit for a while, they may get married, they may get divorced. So these are the sorts of things.
And the
that
church,
social
at least
policy,
many of
even
the
our
mainstream
emotional
churches fight against
expectations
this.
of family life have
They
to
feel
tie
that this
into
is an
family
evidence
life.
of spreading immorality like a cancer among the American people, that if it isn't rolled back, is going to have unbelievably damage to children and to people in general.
So that married people are a minority of American adults.
It may. It depends how long this recession and the aftermath of the recession lasts. This is a long-term trend, the decline in the proportion of married couples in the population, but it's been definitely, I think, exacerbated by the recession. But on the other hand, we may see some bounce back after that as we
Actually,
have in
divorces have been going up
previous recessions
once
when
the economy started to recover.
How is
People were getting jobs and getting divorced.
shaped by income, education, factors like that?
Well, one of the things we're seeing is a tremendous class divide in the access to stable, satisfying relationships, whether married or cohabiting. And the marriages of college-educated couples have been getting more and more stable. The divorce rates have been falling. But that's not so for high school dropouts and even increasingly for high school educated couples. It seems that one of the issues going on here is that we expect more of marriage than ever before, both as an economic partnership and as an emotional partnership.
And not only that, everybody has higher expectations about sexual satisfaction, too.
To count on a man having a steady job. The real wages of high school graduates today are $4 an hour lower in constant dollars than they were back in 1970. They're much more likely to experience job insecurity, much less likely to have pensions. So a woman, low-income woman making a decision about marrying such a man has to figure out, well, what are the benefits of this as compared to the possibility that we might divorce in the future, or as compared to what would happen if I invested in my own education and earnings power. And so I do think we're seeing a class divide that's quite troublesome. I think that it partly
Plus, the feminist movement told women that there's something else you can do with your life than be a housewife.
Well.
Stephanie Kuntz.
So women are going out to the workforce and not deciding not to get married or not to have kids. All right. So hopefully that gave you a good idea here. What I want to go to, I want to move. We only got about 20 minutes, but I want to introduce this section, and then we'll come back to this because we're going to talk also about media stereotypes. But I want to back up some of the stuff that was being said in the book. And it's hard to see. Let me make this a little bit bigger. You see here, this is a report from 2005. It says here, and this should frighten you. This should frighten you anyway, because this number is higher than any other country on earth, including China, which will arrest you for sneezing the wrong way. Okay, seriously. You criticize the Chinese government, you better run. I don't care if you steal Usain Bolt's legs. You're not going to be able, or have a jet plane. You're not going to be able to run away from the Chinese government. And if you do, I'd like to talk to you because I'd like to hear how you did it. Anyway, but on June 30th, 2004, there were 2,131,180 people in U.S. prisons and jails. That's almost 1% of the entire population of the United States. 1 in 100 people is in jail in this country. Okay, but that ain't even the whole story. Because remember from the book, we talked about race and incarceration rates. As That is a 2% rise during the 12 previous months. Federal prisons are growing almost 5 times faster than the state prison populations as of June 30th, 2004. And New York's got one of the highest incarceration rates in the country. You can tell why. Okay. And it's not just the Sopranos doing it, okay? The U.S. incarceration rate was 726 per 100,000 residents. But when you break down the statistics, you see that incarceration is not an equal opportunity punishment. And if you take children out, this rate even goes up higher. If you take children out, which is about 60 million children in the United States under the age of 18, if you don't count them and you look at the percentage of the population that's in jail, it's like 6 or 7%. Okay? So 1 in 20 people is in jail. 1 in 20 adults is in jail in this country. Okay? But this is not just the whole story here. For years, particularly African American advocacy groups, as well as people in the African American community, and now in the Latino community and just as much, have complained that police officers regularly profile African Americans, will tend to trump up charges. There was an incident just the other day where a police officer who was using one of them dashboard cameras was talking to he was white and there were 2 black suspects, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to make some stuff up." And that black neighborhoods get targeted by police because of low, high poverty rates and potential drug use. Let me just put the behavior of the criminal justice system into context for you. Do you think that there's no cocaine being used in the Hamptons? There's probably a fair amount of drugs being used in the Hamptons. Or how about Smithtown? Let's get away from Smithtown. How about Smithtown? You think there's no drugs being used by high school kids? I go down, or where I live in Stony Brook, as he's talking. Anybody know where Ward Melville High School is? I guarantee you, I walk in Ward Melville High School, I get every drug on the planet. I don't even need to go to Columbia. Okay, seriously, if I ran a dog through there, it would stop at every 5th locker, probably. If not, I mean, when it would stop at the marijuana in that building, probably enough to latch Cheech and Chong for a few days. Okay, seriously. But do the cops sit out there and run the dogs through there? Do they do that at inner city high schools? All day long, don't they? They sit outside of projects. Part of the reason why is when you're wealthy and doing drugs, do you need to shoot people for them? So there's less violence involved. So that's part of it here. Also, up until recently, they didn't do community policing. What is community policing, and why would it lead potentially to racism in police forces? Like NYPD and LAPD are some of the worst in the country. To give you an idea what the LAPD has done, they shot an unarmed man, a Haitian man, inside of a vestibule when he was reaching for his keys 33 times, which means that one of the cops reloaded. They also got this guy, and I can't remember I always mix up the name of these 2 people. They also were interrogating this one guy, and I believe he was an alien resident too, and they sodomized him with a plunger. Okay, so that's the way the NYPD has been. And how about the Sean Bell case, right? Remember they shot this unarmed guy outside a strip club the day before he was going to get married because the undercover cops were in there investigating drugs, and they said that they supposedly heard Sean Bell say, "I'm going to go get a gun." And let me ask you something. If you're in Queens next to a strip club, are you going to stop because someone says, "Hi, I'm the cops," freeze, "I'm the cops," and you don't have a badge on or a uniform? Because there have been incidences of people dressing up like Suffolk police and pulling people over and groping people and robbing people and all kinds of stuff. Okay? So community policing is this idea that we get people from the community and hire them as police officers. So they know who's in the neighborhood. They certainly would be similar racially and maybe social class background. What you won't have, what the situation is accused of many people, especially people like Jesse Jackson, where you have cops from wealthy white suburbs who go into the South Bronx with an attitude that every Hispanic and black person they see is a potential suspect. Those of you who are from Queens or parts where this occurs, parts of Brooklyn or the Bronx or even Manhattan, how are the police viewed in black and Hispanic neighborhoods? In a positive manner? Or like the enemy? And you can ask cops this. People in these neighborhoods will not cooperate with them. For the most part. Okay? And part of it, here's the results of it. Here's the other thing, because we're running out of time and I wanted to show you. I'll send you this link. What you see here, I mean, this is absurd. This is about 400 per 100,000, and this goes up to 2,500. The incarceration rate among African Americans is almost 6 times as high, 6 times higher than for whites. And that can't be merely described by, oh, well, white people are less prone to commit crimes. That can't be the case. And even though maybe poverty drives this rate up, because if you look at African American Latinos, they have higher rates of poverty. But it's and also you notice, what major racial group, Knicks fans, is missing?
Asians.
And believe it, Asians have even, I believe, a lower incarceration rate than whites. Asians actually have a lower poverty rate than whites. One of the reasons why is because there's a lot of white people in West Virginia who are broke as a joke. Okay, trust me. Like if you go to West Virginia, almost all the poor people are white. You know, and it's the same way if you go to a place like Great Britain. I know for like most Americans, like, you know, you have this concept of white trailer trash and all this other stuff and stuff, but rarely do you ever see these people. And we saw that in the social class. We missed a whole segment of where they were talking to this one lady who lived in a trailer. It wasn't on there. But anyway, so I find it funny they don't even put Asian people on there, like they don't even exist. All right, here is a story. Let me see if we can do this one first. Let's show this one. This one's a little bit better. I'll show both these. This is about the Rockefeller Drug Laws. And the Rockefeller Drug Laws were laws that were put into place in the 1970s due to the rising crime and as well as drug use and drug addiction rates that was going on in the city. It was set basically that if you committed a drug crime, and it started out marijuana, but it was primarily cocaine and heroin, and especially if you were selling, that you would get minimum mandatory sentences. They wanted to send a message, basically, that if you deal or use drugs, and they didn't make a distinction between addicts and dealers, or people who were dealing to support their habit versus somebody who was dealing to damage the community to make money. And so what eventually started happening, because police profile blacks and African Americans and Latino people, and don't profile rich white people, who, by the way, are the people who are usually buying the drugs. Okay, and I'm telling you right now, I'd be shocked if Bernie Madoff hadn't done coke. I mean, come on. That the prisons were being filled with black and Hispanic people, and this is racism too, as well, obviously. And that not only were black and Hispanics being arrested more, but they were being convicted at a higher rate and being placed in these mandatory minimum sentences. So somebody who was sold $20 worth of crack would get 10 years. Like, seriously. How many people have heard about this before? So just a few? All right, so this is good. This is what education is about. So let's watch this story from the New York Times. Now, they eventually repealed the law because it was challenged in the Supreme Court for being racially biased. And the Supreme Court basically said, you've got to do something about this law. This isn't right. Not only the element of mandatory minimums, but if you got caught with powder cocaine, you would get a 90% lower sentence than somebody who got caught with crack. Where do you usually see powder cocaine? Yep. Bernie Madoff wasn't smoking. Well, if he's smoking it, he's cooking it up by himself, like Richard Pryor or something like that. Okay. And then you see crack in more of the inner city, because you can break it up into smaller pieces. It's just become that way. Okay. All right. So here we go. Listen to this one, and I think this will help you understand the issue a little bit more. If this will play. Let me refresh it.
You know, for $500, I ruined my entire life. I brought an envelope containing 4.5 ounces of cocaine from the Bronx to Mount Vernon, New York, for $500. I met this guy in the bowling alley, and basically he was on my team. He asked me if I wanted to make a fast dollar, like a carrot dangling on a string. I went for it. I brought the envelope up to Mount Vernon, New York, and I walked into a police sting operation. 20 cops came out of nowhere, placed me under arrest. I did everything I could do wrong, and I got a 15-year life sentence for that.
Anthony Papa was convicted under the Rockefeller Drug Laws that were passed in 1973 when Nelson Rockefeller was the governor of New York State, and frustrated at the fact that an earlier program he had planned had not been effective in dealing with drug addiction in New York. What he said was that we were in a war on drugs. Forget for a moment about communism,
So President
about
Nixon
Russia,
called it too.
that this generation of Americans who had survived World War II, who had survived the Depression, fought Nazism, would not be eliminated by some powder or pills or needles, and needed to take a very, very
Yeah,
hard
how's that been going, the war on
So in
drugs?
1973,
We're winning,
the
right?
president proposed mandatory sentences for people convicted of drug possession. It took discretion away from
While he was
judges,
drinking a whiskey.
and from district
Right.
attorneys,
Smoking a
eliminated
cigarette.
plea bargaining, and filled the prisons of New York State.
Over the nearly 36 years since their enactment, the Rockefeller Drug Laws have cost New York State's taxpayers hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, to incarcerate thousands of low-level, non-violent drug offenders.
Over 30 years later, as Speaker Shelley Silver says in the Assembly in New York, the stars seem to be aligned to finally changing that law. It has been chipped away at for a number of years, but now it looks as if the last remnants of the mandatory sentence,
Like marijuana used to be included, now it's a $100
nonviolent
fine if you have under
possession of
25
drugs
grams.
is likely to be wiped away.
The bill restores judicial discretion, which is big because judges right now are handcuffed. Like the judge in my case was handcuffed. He could
It's a
not.
first offense.
not
He gave
give
him
me
15
a
years.
15 life sentence. He had to. It was under mandatory provisions of the laws. Most people I met in prison are serving time under Rockefeller Drug Laws. They have drug problems. They're addicted to drugs, and the treatment is not really available.
Governor Patterson had a long-time commitment to revising the Rockefeller Drug Laws. In fact, he actually went so far as to get himself arrested in a protest against the laws several years ago. Now he's in a
Patterson
position
actually
with the
admitted to
Democrats
using
in
drugs when he was
control of the
younger,
Assembly
including
and the
cocaine.
state Senate to actually redeem that commitment. And
Bloomberg said he smoked pot when he was younger and he
ensure
loved every
that
minute
one
of it.
area
His
law
exact
enforcement.
words.
2009 would be the best chance that we have ever had.
Man, that guy needs to get a new
reform
hairstyle.
the Rockefeller Drug Laws and establish more effective,
He makes Donald Trump
less
look like he's got a
costly,
nice head of hair.
more humane drug policy.
I'm probably going to get a subpoena
here
now
in
from the
state
state
of New
Senate.
York.
Professor Maynard, we heard you make untoward comments about our speaker's hairdo. I was like, look, come on. I'm not saying anything you guys haven't said behind his back. So come on. I mean, what makes you go out in the morning thinking that looks good? Anyway, sorry. We all had bad hair days. I just thought that was bad. Here's another story here from NPR about this, the repeal of the law. If it loads.
This is Weekend Edition from NPR News. I'm Scott Simon. New York's Governor David Patterson unveiled a landmark deal on Friday that would scrap most of his state's so-called Rockefeller Drug Laws. A growing chorus of critics say the system of mandatory prison sentences is just too harsh and too expensive. North Country's Public Radio's Brian Mann reports.
New York's drug laws have been controversial since they were first championed by Republican Governor Nelson Rockefeller as part of the Get Tough on Crime movement that swept the country in the early 70s. Governor David Patterson, a Democrat, says that system was broken from the start, putting thousands of low-level drug abusers behind bars for years and then failing to treat their addictions.
In addition to being unjust, these policies have been ineffective. They simply have not worked. They've only created a revolving door whereby the offenders were mired in a cycle of arrest and abuse.
Lawmakers have been steadily chipping away at the Rockefeller laws for years, creating new drug offender courts and eliminating
He was
those
African
draconian
American,
sentences.
although he was not voted
But
as the
judges
governor.
are still required to follow
But he
strict
did serve as the
sentencing
governor.
guidelines. And the deal
And I believe he
Patterson
was
hammered
from
out with fellow Democrats this week restores
Manhattan or
a huge
Harlem,
amount
one
of
of them.
flexibility. Chief Judge Jonathan Lippman, who heads New York State's highest court, says the reforms were long overdue.
Increasing judicial discretion and expanding opportunities for treatment work. Lives are saved and society benefits.
But this deal strips power from prosecutors who say mandatory minimums help them fight crime in some of New York's toughest neighborhoods. Dan Donovan is DA in Rockland County and heads the State District Attorneys
That's north of the
Association.
city.
He says these reforms could create a new kind of revolving door, one that puts addicts back on the streets.
Drugs are being sold in the lobbies of their housing developments or on the stoops of their
It's
building.
true.
We go in there and arrest some people. You know, in 8 hours, that person is back there.
But so far, the steady erosion of Rockefeller laws hasn't meant more crime, and this deal maintains tough mandatory sentences for drug kingpins. With New York's budget deficit expected to top $16 billion next year, lawmakers are also scrambling to save money. Malcolm Smith, who heads the
So they
state
started
Senate's
letting
new
people out of
Democratic
jail.
majority, says the prison population could eventually be slashed by as many as 7,000 inmates.
We know it costs about $45,000 a year to house one single nonviolent.
That's the tuition rate at Harvard. We could send these people to Harvard.
For the state of New York.
Why not? Bernie Madoff went there. They obviously deal in criminals.
Billions of dollars needed to launch new drug treatment programs will come from the federal stimulus package. These reforms are expected to pass New York's legislature next week. For NPR News, I'm Brian Mann.
The secrets of Darth Vader. Anyway, so you see there,